that.
Yeah, and for Senator Paul as well.
Oh, yes, and ask also that at the conclusion of my remarks that Senator Paul be recognized for up to 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I have a message to deliver this morning, but after sitting here and listening through and enjoying the comments that were made, I wanted to at least make one comment about the senator from Texas. It happens that in my real life, I was a builder and developer for a number of years in South Texas. I know South Texas very well. I know the border well, and that's why I've been down there so much. So and so interested in, of course, the border wall, which we're going to have, but also the fact that we have a wonderful friend and a person who's been a good friend. And, you know, you'd think he's dead, but he's not. He's very much alive, and he's back doing his full-time job. But I want to say that the time that I've spent with him down there in Texas, long before he was even in the position he's in today. He's been a great hero down there to not just the people in Texas, but people all over the country. Now, as far as the comments that were made by the minority leader from New York, you know, it's easy to stand here and talk about this thing. Yeah, I know the Democrats, as a party, they've all gotten together and they don't want to have a wall, but they're going to have a wall. And walls work. You know, just look at the record of having walls. San Diego, they built their wall in 1992. Illegal traffic dropped 92% after that. 92%. El Paso, they built their wall, and I remember when that was built, it was 1993. Illegal traffic dropped 72%. Tucson, they built their wall in 2000. Illegal traffic dropped 90%. Yuma in Arizona, they built theirs in 2005, and illegal traffic dropped. Now, it's happened everywhere. I mean, this is something that, I mean, just look at Israel and the successes that they've had. How many Israelis would be dead today if it weren't for the wall that they have? And we are one of the few countries without a wall, and we're going to have a wall, and it's going to be funded. And so if anyone's listening to what's going on down here, just be assured that we're going to have our wall. Now, I want to make one comment on something that happened 3 or 4 weeks ago when we lost an American hero, and everyone talked about George H.W. Bush, and they talked about their experiences. The reason I wanted to wait a while before making any comments on that is because we've known George H.W. Bush for many, many years before we were actually in politics. So my wife Kay and I are praying for the entire Bush family as the nation mourns and honors Americans, one of its loyal sons. George H.W. Bush was one of the only men I've ever known who could truly love someone into changing his mind. He loved God, he loved his family, he loved his country, and served it tirelessly with passion. As a naval officer, now listen to all the things that he's done. A naval aviator, an ambassador, a director of the CIA, president of the United States, vice president of the United States. He's done it all. George put service to his nation and love above his family above all else. Now, Kay and I have known the Bush family for a long time, dating back to their time in the Texas oil fields. He'd go back and forth to what he referred to as his second home, which was Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we were friends before we were in politics, and I'm grateful for that friendship. I will always remember, and this portrays him very well. Back when I was mayor of Tulsa and George Bush was vice president, he came to Oklahoma, to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to do a fundraiser. And it was a fundraising event. Now, my wife, in spite of her reputation to the contrary, is a pretty shy person. At these events, she always insists, if we're going to be at the head table, she insists that she's going to be seated next to me at the head table. Not insecure or any of that stuff, but nonetheless, this is something she got in her head a long time ago and has always wanted that. So anyway, she looked at the head table at this occasion that we had. This is when George Bush came to Tulsa, Oklahoma to participate in a fundraiser. And she snuck up there and she looked at the head table and name tags and came back to me and she said, "You can't do that." you're not seated next to me. I've got to be seated next to you. And I said, well, who are you seated next to? And she said, George Bush. Well, apparently one of the security guys or someone went back and told George Bush about that, so he came up to her, behind her, and I always remember, he put his arm around her and he said, I don't bite. And he said further, I will take care of you, don't worry about a thing. Now, during their conversation up there, she conceded, of course, to sit next to George Bush. He said, you don't happen to know someone named Marion Bovard, do you? And she said, well, of course, she's a good friend. And he said, well, I haven't seen her in a long time. And Kay said, well, she's sitting right over there. You can see her from here. And so he sent one of his Secret Service people over there to bring Marion Bovard, an old friend, over to visit, and they visited. Well, it turned out that my wife and George H.W. Bush found out that they both had many of the mutual friends, and every time he brings someone up, it happened that person was there. So he'd come over and remind her. He became George Bush's, I think, social director for the remainder of the fundraiser, and I think she even ate his broccoli for him. Now, before I got to Congress, I was a builder and developer in South Texas for many years, and of course, Bush was from Texas. We knew each other at that time. He came to see me a few times when I was working down there, and somehow it always happened to be on days when I was fishing, because I fish every day down there. I mean, that's one of the many problems I have, and I enjoy doing that. And one day he said to me, this is after he was president, he said, you know, I envy you. Now, this is kind of strange to have the president of the United States say, I envy you. And the reason he said that is because he always enjoyed fishing, and he knows I have a whole bunch of kids and grandkids that all like to fish, and he doesn't. So he envies me. And there's a fishing guide that my old chief of staff, Richard Souderette, incidentally, was one who's very similar to George Bush in that I've never heard him be mad at anyone or dislike anyone or talk in a profound way about anyone. And that's the same as you've heard so many people say about George Bush. And so Richard Souderette, who also, he's a lousy fisherman, but he likes to go fishing with me. And he knew this fishing guide, and not many people are aware of this. Bush had this fishing guide here in Washington that would sneak in early in the morning, and they'd go fishing. And his name was Angus, and he went to the White House early one morning to go fishing, and with the president. He was there so early that the Secret Service escorted him up to the residence where he had coffee with the Bushes, who were still in their pajamas. Now this is a good story. You should read the whole thing. It was in the Washington Post, and you can pull it up on my website. But President Bush was restless, sometimes impatient, which don't usually are characteristics that make you a really good fisherman. But because he was steady and dedicated at task at hand, he did okay, and even caught a few fish in the Potomac on that day. When he was running for president, he came to Tulsa for a fundraiser luncheon at the Mayo Hotel. Now, he knew everyone in Tulsa, and he did the normal routine you always do, and we've all done it. You greet the supporters, you give your remarks, and then you open it up for questions. Then I'll never forget this. Ella McGuire is a person who was kind of a party regular in the Republican Party. She stood up and she said, "Are you part of the international communist conspiracy?" And George Bush didn't even blink. He looked over at the organizer and he said, "Where do you find these nuts?" What's the next question? Well, he was vice president. He and Barbara came to Tulsa another time, went with a group who was in charge of picking them up at the airport. Now, I was mayor at that time, and so we had a guy on my staff named Charlie Burris, who was also a security guy, and so we thought he'd be the perfect person to pick up Barbara and George Bush and take them into town. So we get to the airport, and Charlie goes and picks up the luggage and hands it to the person behind him, thinking it was me. He said, "Now, take this to the hotel room." Well, he turned around. Instead of being me, it was Barbara Bush. And she looked a little stunned, but she grabbed the bags and off she went. Now, the cars we came to pick him up in were the cars we always used when we had somebody coming to Tulsa. Why invest in limousines down there? They were funeral home limousines. And Vice President Bush took one look at them, looked in the back, which I think still had a wreath that said "Rest in Peace" on it, and said, "You must have a cheap mayor." And, well, that mayor was me, and I told him I preferred the word frugal. Well, George Bush knew Oklahoma better than any president in history. He is, before that date, even telling reporters that he wanted this to be his turf, his state, frequently called Tulsa, Oklahoma, his second home, but regularly held up Oklahoma as examples of points of light, a state who knew how to use public-private partnership and do all the right things and thrive and be successful. And these were just a few of more of the stories about a man who strived to make every man, every woman, every child that he met feel valuable in his eyes. George Bush saw life as a series of missions, and he completed those missions with fervor and grace. He never wasted a minute, and for that, I'm grateful. As the nation continues to mourn one of the most loyal sons, let us find solace in the fact that he is holding hands, reunited with Barbara again. President Bush, you are a true American hero. Mission complete. God bless you. Oh, one more thing. Today, December the 19th, Kay and I are celebrating our 59th wedding anniversary. And I just want to say, Kay, I still love you. And I yield the floor.